Hi, everyone that is just joining us on streaming. We're going to give it just a minute or two more for a couple of other people who are arriving, and then we'll begin things.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our summer Limmud. We are being presented this evening. I'm Ellen Blaylock, and I'm a member of the Adult Education Committee, and our summer Limmud program is being presented tonight by the Adult Education Committee and our clergy team. We're excited to provide this multi-access program to those of you who are online and those of us who are here in the sanctuary watching. Tonight's presentation will be made by Rabbi Jeff Saxe and Dr. Melissa Sporn, clinical psychologist, who will explore the fraught relationship of twin brothers Jacob and Esau and how their example might inform our own familial relationships. Please note that we will be recording this session for members who wish to view it at a later time. Tonight, we'll be pausing several times during the program to address questions you may have for our presenters. Guests at home can email their question using Cantor Leader's email address sent to you with your program reminder. Be sure also to print or view the resource sheet that was attached to that email. For guests here in the sanctuary, when we pause for questions, I'll come around with the mic. Please allow me to hold the mic for COVID safety. So notice that the mic is pink, I'm pink, we stay together, the mic will come to you. I would also like the presenters to repeat the question when it's heard so that it is clear for everyone who may be listening later in a recording and for those of you who are listening from home and from here. Again, thanks for being with us tonight, and I turn the program over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and thank you to the whole Adult Education Committee and to Cantor Leader for making this happen. A great idea for Summer Limmud. We have a small and incredible and wonderful group of us joining us in the sanctuary. I imagine there are probably more joining us on streaming. And so what Ellen says is really important in terms of we will do our best to make sure that everything that happens in here is well heard out there. And we loosened up the format a little bit from having questions just at the end to interspersing it, partly just because this material is so diverse, and we'll come across some really interesting topics, and then we'll move on from them, and we don't want to miss opportunities to have comments and questions. But since it is such a small group, we could reserve the right to loosen it up even more, depending on how you guys want to interact with this material. So, and I want to thank Melissa Sporn, who is one of our longtime lay leaders and members of the temple, for agreeing to host this with me, and kick around these issues and help us to learn from them and provide her mental health expertise. I asked her just to tell me a little bit more so I could give you more of an idea of what she does. She's a clinical psychologist with a private practice in McLean. She lectures to schools, groups, and organizations in the community on topics such as resiliency, balance, and launching your kids. Perfect for this stuff, right? And she's also an adjunct professor at Gallaudet University. So she has helped us from time to time with signing at our events. So thank you, Melissa. It's really great to be here. I know when I look at you over here on the screen, you see me looking away from you because you're somewhere over there. So we will get used to this dueling views as we go. So
thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for allowing me to do this online. I'd hoped to be in the sanctuary, but our family planned a trip to Rhode Island, so I'm in Narragansett, and thrilled to be able to continue to do this for all of you. And I just appreciate the adult ed program, and Alan and Ellen, and technology.
That's
so
right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have always really loved Jacob. Jacob, I'm probably not alone in, Jacob is a favorite biblical figure for me because of the transformation that he goes through and the journey that he goes through, of course, in addition to being the father of the Jewish people. Some of those kind of more central issues to Jacob's character and who he is going to be the subject of a later session, actually, with Cantor Leader. And so there's this other reason that I love Jacob only in the last 10 years, I say as my wife Jamie walks into the room, because we have twin boys that are now 10 years old. And so since the subject of today is looking at the relationship between Jacob and Esau and thinking about sibling relationships and what it can teach us about family relationships, the Jacob and Esau story is very, very close to my heart. And I don't know if there might be others of you among us who look back on experiences of parenting siblings that have at times strife in their relationships, like Esau and Jacob do, or also if you think about relationships, other relationships that we have in life, and draw parallels in these stories. So I think you have the handout in front of you, and I want to dive in with this first text. And the way we'll do this is I'll present the text with you and talk a little bit about it from a Jewish perspective and just some reactions to the text, and then we'll invite Melissa to share some of her thoughts, and then we can open it up to questions. So this paragraph is quite amazing, and I have a whole bunch of notes on my page because there's so much that comes from it. I'm going to read it real quick. This is the story of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took to wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and the Lord responded to his plea, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children struggled in her womb. So she said, "If so, why do I exist?" She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord answered her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. Then his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. When the boys grew up, Isaac became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors. But Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. So many moments in this text that draw us to different aspects of the things that we could think about today. I wanted to start with these two siblings and the description that we have of them as young men. It's the second of the bold print. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. To me, it's incredible because I have my boys, Jonah and Aaron, and although they are twins, they are incredibly different from each other. One is more of an outdoorsman, a sports guy, and the other is much more of a homebody and does his own thing in other ways. And it really does, I think, make us think about how different siblings are and what their different personalities do to the dynamic in a family. Here it's not just being mentioned as a matter of passing, right? By the way, this is what Esau was like and this is what Jacob was like. It's being told to us as part of the introduction to the struggles of Jacob and Esau. And so I find it fascinating. And next, I'm going to go back to the other bold. God is telling Rebekah, one people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And even, before that, two nations are in your womb. Two separate peoples shall issue from your body. I hear that as God telling Rebekah, each of your boys is going to be great, and they're both going to be fine, and they have an incredible future ahead of them. And so don't worry, they'll be okay. And then following it with the one people shall be mightier, that there will be competition between them, and there will be differences in the ways that they achieve. Just so prophetic, both about the two of them and about our lives. Third, going back further to the middle of the paragraph here, that Rebekah says while the boys are struggling in her womb, if so, why do I exist? Im kain lama anochi. And I just, it's hard for parents to watch this happen. And I think that, that's why I said this paragraph is so rich. It brings us so many aspects of the relationships between siblings and what they do in a family, because it's not just the struggle of Esau and Jacob, but it's the difficulty that it is as a parent to watch the struggles. And I can tell you just from personal experience, my boys are 10 now, and it's difficult to watch them sometimes when they go at each other and they deliberately hurt each other's feelings. And you can see the wheels turning in the competition and the manipulation. And then, of course, you see in the next moment they're working together and having a good time together and helping each other. There are times when it's really hard to figure out how to deal with it and what to do. And lastly, before I ask Melissa to comment, the very last sentence or two of the paragraph: Isaac favored Esau because he had a taste for game, and Rebekah favored Jacob. And it's terrible, right? I mean, how could they do that, right? It's just awful. And yet, we develop relationships with our kids, and we develop particular relationships with each kid, and we might not really be favoring them, or we might not think of it, and of course we don't want to be favoring them, but we do have different relationships with each kid, and each parent might have a different relationship. And so think I guess it's wise and fascinating that the Bible is able to point to that for us. That it seems like a kind of a fable, or it seems like a dramatic story, but in fact, it does reflect real life. Okay, so I want to turn it over to Melissa.
So it's interesting because I was thinking as you reread it, and of course we've read this a couple times, many times in preparation. I was thinking of how predictive it is of what's to come. In that, we now know the parents have already sort of selected their favorites. And one of the questions is, where does sibling rivalry come from? And in this circumstance, it's very clear from the onset that it's the parents who kind of select whom they align with most. And as you said, while we don't like as parents to ever say we have a favorite child, naturally, organically, we tend to align with those who are more like us. And often one of our children is more like one of us, and one may be like the other. And, some of the research I looked at single parent families and how the child who isn't the similar child fares. And you can imagine that the competition and the rivalry is even more heated. As you were talking, Jeff, I was wondering, in the research I looked at, it talked about sibling rivalry developing as early as 3. And, the researchers debate about whether it's sort of inbred biological that we compete, or it's a competition for both attention and resources. The stronger sibling gets, the last French fry kind of theory. But I also think that this idea that 8 times an hour siblings conflict, and as parents of twins, I almost wanted you to do a little research study and see, was it 8 times an hour? Are we hitting that, or are we going over?
It's definitely over 8 times an hour.
But I think this idea that they develop such independent individual personalities, that expectation that they're being raised in the same home with the same parents, and especially with twins at the same time with the same circumstances, right? It's not like children who are born 3 or 4 years apart from one another. You'd assume, they're going to be the same. And yet they have such divergent interests and such divergent personalities. And so that, more than anything, shows us that nature-nurture phenomenon, that they're impacted by both. And often nature, more than nurture, determines who these kids will be.
And they have very different gifts as well, very different naturally endowed gifts of the skills that they have.
Mm-hmm. And I love that they're describing this almost from the womb. That's that idea of nature. Like, they came out different, just so uniquely unto themselves. And that expectation that somehow they're going to be the same isn't healthy for us as parents, that expectation. We were talking about twins in particular, often choosing very different interests, very different passions, because it diminishes the competition. When we see twins who are invested in the same thing, it's very unique. So one of the, I was saying, like the Mannings, it's Peyton Manning and
Eli and Peyton Manning, right? Who you're the one who brought that up when we were talking about it, so I'm not going to take the credit from you.
But that's a really unique circumstance, and we don't see a lot of that. The Williams sisters are another example where, and in both cases, their parents were very much involved in the sport as well, so they influence that. But typically, you don't see, even though as parents, it makes it so much easier if our kids are both playing the same sport, or and we can hand down for the younger sibling the materials. Often the younger sibling will diverge from that area of interest because I can't compete with my older sibling, or I want to find my own thing. And And sometimes the situation occurs where the younger sibling's better at it, and that creates even more competition. So to avoid that, I'll just pick a different hobby.
My sister and I are both rabbis, and went down similar paths in some ways, and so I can relate to that myself as well. But we did choose different kind of different ways to emphasize our rabbinate according to our individual who we were as individuals.
Which probably expresses your strengths too.
Right. Absolutely. So I did write one of these questions here at the bottom of the sheet. Does the rivalry come from the parents or from the children? Because we have both of those things in here. It's something that you all could, you all and also those on streaming could raise a question or comment about too. Melissa, I don't know if you have a thought specifically about that.
As I said, in this situation, I think there's this aspect of the Torah kind of telling us that the parents kind of started the rivalry in a way because they favored one child or the other for their individual talents. But again, the research sees rivalry beginning as early as 3 years old, where, I don't know that kids are necessarily that reactive or to our own responses to them, but it's much more shared resources. It's no, I want it, or it's mine.
Yeah.
And that idea of, living with another person and having to share everything and at
also,
that age.
Melissa, it's made more complicated by the other. I didn't emphasize this in the text here, but it also says that then his brother, Jacob, Esau's brother, emerged, holding on to the heel of Esau.
I love that.
So did it really, it's not necessarily that it emerged, that it was started by the parents.
Right. And this concept that, almost like I'm going to pull you and get there first, like I almost, that's how I see them in the womb.
Right.
Like I'm going to keep you, either I'm going to keep you in here with me or we're racing to the exit and somehow you got there first, but I'm going to try and pull you back.
Absolutely. And Jamie and my kids were competing for food in the womb, one taking from the other. And we were worried the doctors were worried about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Think we have a comment?
Sure.
Jay, do you want to? Jamie, you need the microphone.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And then even in the womb, there was a dominant twin, right? So right away, we knew their personalities before they even came out. I had stress tests every week, and one baby A would pass and baby B would fail. The stress test, and baby A was the mover and baby B was the rester. And it continues to be that way. So it's interesting to see early on.
That's true.
Yeah, and I think that we talk about that from, those people who do neonatal studies and later life and do those longitudinal studies, see kids that are much more active in utero are much more active. There's some research that talks about ADHD in utero. And sort of, the much more active kids tend to develop attentional issues. And so, there's some belief that we could diagnose it as early as, 20, I think it's 22 weeks. When you start having all that activity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's speculative, but certainly their personalities are very present when they're born and when they present to us, whether it's they're more needy or more noisy or more docile or more easily soothed, and that tends to project long into their lives.
Right, and that certainly is shown here in the text.
Yeah.
I was always under the impression that identical twins were much closer. And I'm wondering if Jacob and Esau were fraternal twins. And maybe that's why there was a difference. I don't know if there's been any studies done on that.
Well, I would think, not being a doctor.
So people make sure they
Sure.
heard.
Okay. Yeah. So the question was, perhaps do we know whether Jacob and Esau are or are not identical twins? And and you were saying that you had heard that that makes a difference in terms of the level of sibling rivalry. Is that right? I got your question right? Yeah. Well, looking at the text, all I can point to is that one is red like a hairy mantle all over, and the other's not. So I don't know. Are there doctors or scientists in the room that can tell us that that means that they were not identical twins? I'm not sure, but I was assuming yes.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to whether or not even identical twins, if they're would be different in birth.
It sure would have made it easier for Jacob to steal Esau's birthright if they were identical. The same voices, because Esau says the arm is the arm of Esau, but the voice is the voice of Jacob when Jacob is in there trying to trick his father. So he can tell their voices apart even in his old age. So I'm just gathering evidence
But
to remember the story.
it is not real that identical twins, monozygotic twins, are less conflicting than heterogeneous twins. So dizygotic twins. So twins fight, and conflict is seen in both identical and non-identical twins. And there isn't more or less. There's this myth that identical twins are closer, but we don't actually see that bearing out in the research.
Okay.
I was just wondering, Rabbi Saxe, how your twins could compete for food when they're fed through the umbilical cord. I was just wondering.
Right. No, apparently the somehow one fetus was gathering more food through the body's system than the other, and they were concerned that baby B was not getting enough nutrients because it was all going to baby A.
And
obviously, it's not really anything that Aaron was doing. It was, right? I would think, but it was just it was something that was happening.
So, and we see
Right.
different circumstances like that. There are stories of twins in utero, one grabbing the sort of leg of, or and
toy.
causing injuries in utero.
Oh.
So, and there's not a lot of space, and some take up more space. So there is this unique kind of developmental push me, pull you going on.
Right.
And often twins are not the same size at birth. So that, even twins that are identical can, be very different in weight.
Right. So we'll move on to a next set of texts on page 2. Now Esau harbored a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And Esau said to himself, so this is after Jacob has tricked Isaac into giving him the blessing instead of his older brother Esau, slightly older. And Esau said to himself, let but the mourning period of my father come after my father dies, and I will kill my brother Jacob. When the words of her older son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. Now, my son, listen to me. Flee at once to Haran, to my brother Laban. So he does. He leaves for 20 years until he eventually reunites and sees Esau again. I'm interested in this text both from a Peshat perspective and from a Darash perspective. And the Peshat is the plain sense meaning of what is really happening here, and the Darash is what we take from it in terms of meaning and deeper meaning. From the Peshat, Esau is really planning on killing his brother, right? is this dramatic, literary exaggeration? Or is this something that happens? I mean, I know it does happen, but how much is this really a thing? And even if it doesn't, of course, we know it doesn't happen often, but is ideation of this something that's more common than we realize, that actually there's enough anger that siblings think about really hurting each other beyond the the punching and the kicking and the scratching that we many of us see with our kids all the time. And then, so that's the peshat, the plain sense question I have. And the other one is this interesting verse: your brother Esau is consoling himself by planning to kill you. And I picture this as resentment. I mean, what do our kids who have siblings, or ourselves when we are thinking about our own siblings, what preoccupies us at night? Are we resentful to the point that we really spend our time thinking about this and plotting our revenge, whether it's, one-upping the other, or, getting a zinger in the next day, or finding some way to get a one-up, or what it is, and what role does that resentment play? Because I really was intrigued by this idea that even if you take Esau out of the realm of actually thinking about killing his brother, because we don't actually know whether he said this in, literally thinking that it was going to be true, or was he just really angry and he never would have done it. We just know that Rebecca was scared, right? And so what is the role of the sibling rivalry and ruminating and thinking about it in consoling ourselves for our own difficulties? I don't know if I
So
just
I
made
think-
myself clear, but
Yeah, you did. I think there are two aspects that I read in the text, and one is the sort of protagonist, Esau, saying, I'm going to kill my brother. And the other is the mother's reaction to that. I think about the number of times my mother probably heard my brother saying, I'm going to kill you. Or me saying, I wish you were dead. Versus what was reality. And how do we know that differentiation? How do we assess? I did, the rage, that momentary ferocity that we can see in young people when they feel scorned or they feel wronged. And in this case, the wrong is so huge. I mean, this is, his birthright. And that's devastating. And when we see siblings who feud or don't speak to each other for years and years and years. In my family, my grandmother didn't speak to her sister because her daughter didn't invite my brother and I to her granddaughter's bat mitzvah. Like, I wouldn't have known these people if I fell over them in Manhattan, but it hurt my grandmother so deeply she didn't speak to her sibling. And I thought, well, could my brother ever do anything that I wouldn't speak to him? I can't imagine that. In this case, could a sibling do anything to make you kill them? And, or is this just hyperbole? Is this just, I'm expressing my frustration and my just anger, and, he's just aghast at the fact that his brother could do this to him and that it could happen and he could succeed. So he just wants to rage.
right.
But the mother's interpretation is, oh my goodness, this could be real. I'm going to send you, go away quick because your brother's coming after you. Which, again, for a mother to send her child away has to be one of the most difficult things to do. So that sacrifice too is pretty significant. So she absolutely thought Esau was being honest.
And then there's also the really common question, I think, for parents. Certainly, it's one that we have struggled with. When do you interfere? How much do you try to minimize the violence between your children? It is not. I'll confess to this closed audience that it's not uncommon for one of our kids to say to each other, "I'm going to scratch you as hard as I can." That make threats. And it's hard for us to know. When do we step in and keep them from each other, or or take sides when there's been violence? And when do we just step back and let it happen?
So is this a good time for me to sort of go through the how to kind of approach conflict? And, I think growing up, my mother's rule was no blood, no broken bones, I don't intervene, because she saw most of the conflict as being a desire for her attention. And
Right.
that we needed to learn how to resolve our conflict independently. Well, I don't think that diminished the conflict. And sometimes there was certainly a wish on my part, because I had an older brother, that she did intervene. But many psychologists will say that to the degree that we can kind of step out of it as adults and let our kids resolve it, they're better off. So the steps that, are recommended are that we're going to reframe conflict. We tend to see conflict as bad, and instead we're going to see it kind of as a normal occurrence that helps build resiliency, that helps deepen their connection. So one of the things that you talk about is this kind of pendulum between arguing and fighting, and then coming together and playing together happily. And it really is kind of this back and forth. But first, we're just going to kind of stop and think, is this an opportunity to teach problem solving? Are either of the kids really receptive to kind of my intervening? Do they need you to mediate? Is a big question. Rather, sometimes we do it because we just want quiet, or we're embarrassed because they're doing it in public. But rather, do they have the skills and the capability, if we let it play out, for them to figure it out and work it out on their own? That's that no blood, no bones broken, don't intervene. Then evaluate if you step in, you want to really assess the emotional state of each kid. And are they, again, receptive? If I sort of say, I use a scaling question, 10 flights of a building at 10, I'm going to push my brother off. If I'm a 5 or above, I'm not at all receptive to negotiation or discussion, and I need to calm down. So you may just need to separate them and have them calm down, and then bring them back together. The next step is what I call what happened. So sort of, you want to hear from each of them, and you're going to ask each of them calmly and respectfully to tell their side of the story. What from the I, what did I do? What did I see? And ask the other to listen empathically, which can be hard, putting themselves in the other's shoes. You're asking them to describe feelings again. So when you did X, it made me feel Y. And I ask kids to kind of avoid never and always statements, sort of these globalizing statements that just are going to bring up defensiveness and reactiveness. I like the question, what are you responsible for? What responsibility will you take that led to this conflict? And then in terms of forgiveness, we typically ask, well, you need to say you're sorry. And instead of saying, say you're sorry, I encourage the kids to ask for forgiveness. So, I need you, I would like for you to forgive me for, and what are you asking forgiveness of? Please forgive me for. And then what are you willing to give up to reach a resolution is another question you can ask them. So sometimes they're fighting over a desired object, or a game, or an activity, or even what to watch on TV. And sort of, are you willing to give up your selection of a choice so that you can get along? And I think that overarching kind of shalom bayit, that peace in the home, like, how do you create that? So if I intervene now, am I gaining peace in the home over, them learning conflict resolution skills? And certainly, all of the research in looking at about 83% of the United States kids are born with siblings. And much research has been done on the difference between growing up with a sibling versus growing up as an only child. And one of the things that we see is that children who grow up with siblings tend to be more resilient.
Great. I love that list. Thank you. I think we did have a comment or two.
Well, we had a question, and after Melissa has been speaking, I'm not sure whether it even matters, but how old were Jacob and Esau when this happened? Were they in their 20s? Because when you're in your 20s, it's not so, you're just not grown and an adult yet, and it wouldn't be uncommon for you to have a really difficult situation. But in thinking about what Melissa shared about her grandmother and the breach with her sister, clearly they were in most likely their 60s. My mother had a breach with her sister when my mother was probably in her very late 40s, almost early 50s. And Jim had a situation in his family too where there was a breach and the person was in their 70s. So I'm not sure that it really matters how old you are. I think that you can have this conflict and this breach at any time.
I agree. I have two cousins who are brothers who had their families never spoke for 20 years or so until they finally reconciled on the deathbed of one of them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we see these breaches in families, often there's history of resentment, jealousy, retaliation, reaction, high reactionary, and often very poor conflict resolution skills, right? How might my grandmother have handled it differently and communicated her frustration or disappointment so that she could have maintained a relationship with her sister?
I'm just wondering, when you were talking about when do you step in and when do you not step in, I have a situation like what Rabbi Saxe says. I have two cousins who are in their early 50s, two brothers who haven't spoken in years. And do you step in? I mean, it's none of my business, or is it my business? How do you help them to reconcile? So many years have gone by. Is it my business? Is it not my business? My aunt is upset about it. They haven't spoken in years. And what do you do? If from a Jewish perspective, is it something that I should say, hey, why aren't you talking? Should I step in and try to get them to talk, or should I not? What would Judaism say?
Here, I thought the question was going to be for Melissa, and she turned it around to me. Oh, no. What would Judaism say? Well, I feel like, we are taught to be Ohev Shalom v'Rodev Shalom, right? To take the text that comes from the ethics of our fathers, something that Hillel said, that we should be lovers of peace and pursuers of peace is where our name comes from, Rodef Shalom. That it's hard for me to imagine that Jewish teaching would have us refrain from trying to make peace between our brothers if it could happen. So then I guess but really the question you're asking is really about, does our action trying to help them really help, or does it just make things even worse, right? Maybe? Or is it our responsibility? Yeah.
I'll interject that, I think when people ask me, should I intervene in any given situation, my first question is, whose problem is this? And I do think that you can communicate the degree to which it disappoints you, it saddens you, it affects all family gatherings and every, engagement that you all go to. If you invite them both, one won't come, one will come, or if they come, there's fear that they'll get into arguments. And you can certainly communicate that. Sometimes it's helpful to look at a time when they were more collaborative and more at peace with one another, kind of send them each photos of when they were joyous together, so that they can remember there was a time when there wasn't all this resentment, there wasn't all this hostility, there wasn't all this hate. Is that helpful?
Yeah, Cantor Leader, do you have something from email? Or?
I actually have a question, my own question. I want to encourage our people at home to text. I keep watching my email.
So is it text or is it email?
Email, sorry. But this story is fraught with trouble and conflict. But what bothers me most is Rebecca. And Jewish tradition looks pretty kindly on her, appropriately or not. The rabbis say, well, she's fulfilling God's promise in ensuring that Jacob becomes the stronger nation and gets the blessing. But on the other hand, I think of Rebecca as a mom as like, how is she going along with this? And how is she telling her son, to leave and not trying to resolve in any way this conflict?
Jacob is her favorite.
Yeah, you're right.
I love that question. I resonate with it very much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she is culpable for sure. And again, that's when we ask the question about how much is the parents in this scenario. I think she is culpable in many instances in their story for both igniting the conflict and perpetuating it. Right? She didn't say to Esau, "No, you can't kill your brother," and we're going to work this out as a family, and we'll figure out. We can divide the. Dad gave him the blessing, but truly, I'll give you the diamonds, whatever. But rather, she says, "No, Jacob, you go off. You need to go to Lavan, leave," because of her fear. And so I think that concept of acting out of fear versus acting out of love, too, is a piece. And I think that there was this favoritism streak that is sort of stated earlier and predictive of the outcome.
A question about communication in this family. First of all, Esau's harboring all these resentments, but doesn't go to his father to try to have some kind of discussion about how he feels. And he's going to carry out his revenge after his father dies. But also, Rebecca doesn't go to her husband and say, "We have a problem with our sons. Let's sit down and figure this out as a family." So that's so apparent in the description of what happens.
What was surprising to me as well is this idea that if Jacob, if there was a recognition that there was a mistake on who got the blessing, that couldn't be changed. It's one thing when you marry the wrong woman, like, okay, the ceremony's done, we're done. But in this case, like, couldn't they have said, wait a second, there's been an error?
Well, there is a little more to the story, and actually that is kind of a favorite drash of mine. So thank you for bringing it up, Fran. In a part of the story that isn't quoted here in the packet, Jacob leaves Isaac's presence after having stolen the blessing, because he had jumped the gun. Rebecca had given him a cooked meal to bring in while Esau was off hunting the game and preparing it himself. So it took him longer. So Jacob finished, and then Esau went in to get the blessing. Isaac trembled and said, "Who is it that just came in and took the blessing? If this is you, Esau, then who just took the blessing?" And they figured out that it was Jacob. And Esau starts to wail and cry and yell. And he says, how could Jacob have done this to me? But also he says, "Haven't you saved a blessing for me, Father? Bless me too. Isn't there another blessing for me?" And Isaac says, "Well, your brother came and took your blessing. That was the blessing." And Esau says again, "You haven't saved a blessing for me? Bless me too, Father." And then Isaac pulls out another blessing. He just pulls it out of his sleeve. He gives a blessing. And it's not quite the blessing that Jacob got, but it's a nice blessing. And I love to talk about that text as a way of bringing out the message that there is enough, that sometimes we feel there isn't enough, and that there's a scarcity and we have to compete over the resources, or always feel like we're reaching. But if we look in the right place, if we look inside of ourselves or whatever, however, there is enough, and you can find enough blessing. And I think that is an important message with sibling rivalry too. That and Isaac in his wisdom, even though it took him a while and he had to be urged on by Esau, he does come up with it.
Yeah, this concept of, we used to say fair but not even, not equal. Kids will always say that's not fair, and I say, well, no, it is fair. It's just not equal. And we used to say if Eli needed a shot, does that mean, Sam, you have to get one? That would be equal. Fair is Eli needs the shot, you don't, so you don't have to get one, and certainly at times in our children's lives, we're giving more attention to one or the other, and that doesn't seem fair.
Mm-hmm.
It is fair, it's just not equal.
Yeah. So as we move on to the next section on reconciliation, one thing I want to take from what we just talked about is that Rebecca is the one who hears of Esau's mumblings that he's gonna kill his brother, and sends Jacob away. And I guess I hadn't really ever thought of it until now, as we're doing this program, that we don't really know that this was going to happen, right? We don't know what the nature of Esau's anger was, as we just talked about, but she takes it upon herself to send him away. And so it just calls to my mind the question of what is really going on here in the story. Do we really know from reading it what is in people's minds and what's really happening? And I think that's really very much the case in this next paragraph that I highlighted. What's happening is Jacob left. He went to his uncle Laban's place. He ended up working for Laban for 20 years, during which time he married Leah and he married Rachel, and then developed also for himself some wealth, and comes away with some of Laban's livestock, and he's ready to go off on his own with wives and servants and lots of stuff. And he hears that his brother is coming to meet him with 400 men. So he's a little freaked out. Okay, so what he does is he spends the night, and I'm sure that Cantor Leader is going to talk about this when he does his session. He spends the night on one side of the Jabbok River preparing himself. He sends all his stuff and his servants and his family ahead with gifts, etc., for Esau, and then he goes. Looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids, putting the maids and their children first, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. He himself went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times until he was near his brother. That's a way of apology in those times, to bow low 7 times. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him, and they wept. Looking about, he saw the women and the children. Who, he asked, are these with you? He answered, the children with whom God has favored your servant. Then the maids with their children came forward and bowed low. Next, Leah with her children came forward and bowed low. And last, Joseph and Rachel came forward and bowed low. And Esau asked, what do you mean by all this company which I have met? He answered, to gain my Lord's favor. Esau said, I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. But Jacob said, no, I pray you, if you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God. And you have received me favorably. Please accept my present, which has been brought to you. For God has favored me, and I have plenty. And when he urged him, he accepted. So the gift, he's obviously not giving him his whole family, as it kind of sounds here, but he's presented a lot of gifts of some of the livestock and other things. And what strikes me is there's so much room to read into this, different interpretations of what's really happening. Rashi, the great commentator, believes that Esau was angry and remained angry and was coming at him with 400 men with plans to do Jacob in. And he was swayed by Jacob's, dramatic act of apology, the bowing 7 times and the sending of gifts, which is interesting because to me, actually, when I read this text, I don't see that at all because it just says Esau ran to greet him. I see Esau, after 20 years, has gone through a total transformation. And he doesn't need this stuff anymore. And he's not angry at his brother anymore. And he kisses him and he missed him and he's happy to see him. And that he's already over it. But Jacob, on the other hand, is not. He's the one who's not over it. He still is afraid and feels guilty and hasn't dealt with what he's done. In addition, I see that, and there are rabbinical interpretations. You may know or you may not know, Esau is the subject of a lot of rabbinical commentary. The rabbis feel that they need to make Esau into an evil person because they want to make sure that Jacob is reflected on well. And so they're constantly finding ways to show you that Esau is bad. So what they say here is... actually, we'll get to that in a moment. Does he really mean his generosity? And that will come next. But one interesting aspect of that in this paragraph is on verse 9, when he says, I have enough, my brother, let what you have remain yours, is interpreted very importantly by the rabbis as finally Esau is conceding to Jacob the birthright that he had stolen from him. So it's no longer owed. I have enough. You can have it. You can have what you have. So it's really a transactional moment for the rabbis. So I'll stop there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things that I wrote down in the psychological perspective is just the intense nature of our sibling relationships, that for most of us, these are the longest relationships in our lives, that, they begin at our birth or at the birth of our sibling, and for twins at our birth, and then they continue throughout our lives. So longer than our parents, longer than our partners, longer than most of all of our friends. And the intensity of those relationships really form the way in which we interact with the world. So, the idea that Esau would forgive his brother seems natural to me. Obviously, this idea of a rift or maintaining that hostility and that anger. So while I understand the commentaries wanting to have that yin and yang, that evil and good, in this scenario, I feel like both brothers stepped up to a higher calling. Jacob by, acknowledging his doing his brother wrong, by sending his gifts ahead of him and by bowing. And his using the word my Lord, and I that strikes me given, the commandments and sort of him saying Esau is like God to him. And I certainly think that's another aspect of sibling. The younger sibling often looks up to the older sibling and they're godlike, right?
That's interesting. If I guess I'll stick in. My Lord is a little different. This is my Lord, as in, as somebody might say in a feudal society, it's really just to another person. And Adonai is actually the my Lord that comes from Adonai is a later rabbinic creation of a replacement of Yud He Vav He. So it's a little more complicated, but yeah, he's still putting him above.
So would Lord be above you then? So to gain favor of my Lord.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's not a godlike thing, but yes,
right.
Yes, definitely in putting someone above you.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Hebrew for that, David asked, what's the Hebrew for that? My Lord, I don't have the Hebrew on the paper here, but I imagine it's Adoni. Adonai is the way we say my Lord as in the eternal, and Adoni, which is singular as opposed to plural, because sometimes we refer to God in the plural, or that is basically how we refer to God. It means singular, my sire, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or questions on this? We can go into this next section. Brings out some more of this very moment on page 3. And this is really going back. You can see in the middle of the page here, Bereshit Rabbah, which is a midrashic collection of commentaries. And this is a commentary on the verse within the last paragraph we read, and he kissed him. There's a lot done with that word, and he kissed. So Vaishakehu is the Hebrew for and he kissed him. And there are dots in the manuscript. There are dots over that word, which is a flag that there's something strange going on here. One of the plays that the rabbis do with this word is that Vaishakehu it means to kiss, and it's very close to another word. The k is a kuf. There's another way to make the k sound, and that's a kaf. And the rabbis suggest that maybe the dots are telling us that this should be a kaf instead of a kuf, and that would change the word from kiss to bite. So it kind of underlines this question that I was asking of what is really going on here. Is Esau really kissing him, or is he trying to bite him? So Rabbi Yanai, this is now going to the page 3. Rabbi Yanai said to him, "If so, why is kissed added?" This is a play on that. On the contrary, it teaches that Esau came not to kiss Jacob, but to bite him. But our ancestor Jacob's neck became like marble, and that wicked man's teeth were blunted. This is part of the rabbis' imaginings of the good and the evil. Hence they wept, teaches that Jacob wept because of his neck, and Esau wept because of his teeth. So I don't quite understand why Jacob is weeping because of his neck, because his neck protected him. His neck became marble and protected him from the biting. Maybe he wept in joy from the fact that he was protected from his brother's wrath. And Esau is just sad that he can't now kill his brother by biting him in the neck. So I find that kind of fun and interesting to look at the way the rabbis play with Jacob and Esau. But then if we look below, it goes a little bit deeper, that the dots are intended to suggest, okay, some explaining the dot, meaning that he did not kiss him with his whole heart. Whereas Rabbi Simeon says, is it not well known that Esau hated Jacob, but at that moment his pity was really aroused, and he kissed him with his whole heart. So the rabbis are bringing up both of these possibilities, that maybe the dots are there to show biting because he kissed him, but he was forgiving him and embracing him, but only a little bit. It wasn't full. And then another interpretation that he still had all this anger, but in this moment, because of this great apology, he was able to embrace him and kiss him wholeheartedly. That maybe there are moments when we do feel great love for our siblings, even though there is all that resentment. And to what extent are those complicated emotions? Do they keep us from fully being loving towards our siblings or our other family members? And to what extent are there moments of hot and cold where we feel that anger, but on the other hand, we also are capable of really acts of great and unrestrained affection and embracing?
Yeah, I think that concept of sort of feigning apology or feigning, forgiveness, versus it being wholehearted is really interesting. For me, the rabbi's making a jump to the marble neck. It's like there's nothing in the text that says that. So that seems a little of a reach, but trying to understand, maybe the dots over was like he kissed him, but it wasn't like a real kiss, it was sort of all right, I'll let you off the hook here. But what's interesting is the statement that comes next is so heartfelt. You don't need to give me all this stuff. That just having you back in my life kind of is enough. Seems to belay that idea that he bit him,
Right. I agree. I also find powerful, going back to that paragraph, we're talking about the ability to embrace wholeheartedly. The beautiful verse, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, that Jacob says to him, that, when there is reconciliation and in those moments of closeness, you can really have there's a lot of emotion in there.
Well, and I think through conflict and resolution, it's sort of, we understand our personhood, right? We that humanity, and perhaps that's where God lies, in those moments when we give up our petty jealousies and our anger and our resentment, and we let love prevail.
Uh-huh. A couple of other points that I'll tell you about, just because I think it's kind of interesting and fun to look at the rabbinical playing around with Esau and Jacob. The rabbis of the commentaries also say that when Esau finally moves on, because they have this this moment, but then they do separate. That when Esau does move on, his 400 men all peel off and desert him, and they are rewarded by God for this. So this is just, Esau is so awful. And they try to put another motivation into Esau's words when he says, I have plenty, I have enough. He's saying, I have plenty, that he's actually bragging and being haughty.
Mm-hmm.
Yesh li kol, I have everything. And finally, when the Rashi says that when Jacob says those words that I just quoted, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, he's actually trying to scare Esau, because Esau must magically know that, as Alan I know is going to talk about, Jacob just wrestled with an angel the night before across the river, and he wrestled and prevailed against this messenger of God. And so he's trying to remind Esau, seeing you is like seeing the face of God that I just actually saw yesterday. Yeah, and I wrestled with him, and I beat him. Yeah, so that Esau will not try to take him on. I don't know. As a rabbi, I find these things kind of fun and interesting. I know they're pretty crazy. Any last comments on this? And we have another section.
It's clear that the source of the conflict between Jacob and Esau was Rebekah and Isaac. The reconciliation obviously came after they were dead. In other words, the parents were the source of the conflict between the two of them. And after the parents died, they were able to reconcile.
With the parents out of the way.
I think that's probably, in my understanding is that would be fairly common, that siblings put aside their differences when the source of that conflict is gone.
That's fascinating, and does it suggest that we as parents should just get out of the way? Mm-hmm.
I think in this scenario, it suggests that these parents were doing more to the demise of the brothers' relationship right? By not resolving their own issues and, by not having equal blessings on their twins, right?
Right.
Um, and, and certainly parents can reinforce kind of hostilities and set up um, comparisons. There's lots of in my practice, I see lots of those situations where parents will say, why can't you take your studies seriously like your brother, or why can't you be as good at sports as your sister, so it really does set up a dynamic that I now I hate my sibling.
Yeah. Well, as you speak, I'm running through all the things I've done wrong in the last week.
We've
all
all
the things
said
I've
it.
said wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all done it. And it's hard not to, because those are our comparison model. That's the other unique thing, that, we don't have I joked when I gave birth to my daughter that, when I said, when the placenta came out, can you search for the operating instructions? Because you go to McDonald's and you have this little Happy Meal toy and it has operating instructions, press button, light, lights. But these amazing beings come out and there's no operating instructions, and there are hundreds of thousands of parenting books, and most of them conflict with each other. So there isn't a one way to do it. And many of us use our first child as our sort of experimental model, right? It's where we test things out and make most of our larger mistakes.
Yeah.
And then, our later children are sort of, okay, now we're in the swing of things. I got this. I know how to do this. And so, that can often be, whom we compare. We sort of say, why can't you be more like? And the reality is, because we can't. We are unique beings. And, so we do have to kind of check that language and recognize, that we all, it's that I wish, people do what they want to do. They don't do what we want them to do. And we wish for our children, it would be so much easier if they were just identical in many ways, because then when we said or did anything, they would all react exactly the same way. And we wouldn't have those shocking surprises when, we think we're on the right track and no, back out in left field. And so, but the reality is they are really unique, and we can, us being the same parents, very different outcomes with our kids.
Right.
And temperaments and personalities and,
yeah,
which makes it exciting.
Right. Thank you, Melissa. So a last text, and it touches on their separation. Esau said, "Let us start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace." But he said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me. If they are driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Then Esau said, "Let me assign you some of the men who are with me." But he said, "Oh, no, my Lord is too kind to me." So Esau started back that day on his way to Seir. And I actually cut it off because then Jacob goes off in a different direction. And although it sounds here like Jacob is saying, no, you go on ahead, I'll catch up with you, he doesn't ever actually follow. He goes off his own way. And, it's interesting that you could believe that Jacob really longed for this reunion and reconciliation with Esau. Although you could also read it that he didn't really, it wasn't so much that he wanted that, it was more that he was afraid of being attacked. And either way, you sense that he didn't want to be anywhere near his brother on an everyday basis. And
this is where I
yeah.
had shared with Jeff my, I don't know where I heard this phrase, but like fish and family smell after 3 days. Like, we all love getting together with family, and then our patience bears pretty thin after a couple of days. And I think that's what Jacob and Esau are feeling, or Jacob's feeling
Jacob,
about,
not Esau, right?
yeah, that I don't, and that idea that Esau was a hunter, that he was sort of, he presents as rough and tumble, and Jacob was much more of a feeler, and much, you can just sort of imagine in today's world these two people being together and having kind of nothing to really talk about, and nothing, no shared interests and no shared kind of activities.
Absolutely. Right. Any reflections on this? Our family and our distance from them? There's one more thing that I would love to share with you, and that's on the last page. It's a song I wrote when I was in rabbinical school. Because, as I said, I've always been fascinated by the story of Jacob, and this song was for a class on modern midrash. Midrash is the sort of the type of commentary that adds on to the story and tells us more of what people were thinking or feeling, or what actually happened. And that's why, Melissa, when you mentioned earlier that something seemed to stretch to read that into the text, that's all over Judaism. This, it's a very accepted way of interpreting text, to bring in stuff that's totally imagined by the rabbis and brought in. So this is how I imagined Jacob is feeling during that night before he goes and meets up with his brother. And while some of this is about Jacob's own journey and his transformation, we can think about it really looking at the things that we talked about today in terms of the relationship between him and Esau. So there's no one around, but I'm not alone. This is because Jacob has sent all his family and everybody across the river, and he's now spending the night on the other side of the Jabbok River. 85 degrees, I just imagine it's hot in the desert. 85 degrees, and I'm shaking. I didn't know then why I did all that, why I'm staying here. Set my life to the other side. There's a fight inside, and I can't calm down. And this, I imagine, as I was saying before, that my imagination is that Esau isn't struggling with this anymore, but Jacob still is. The things I've said, hineni, that's a big word in our congregation that Rabbi Schwartzman gave her first Rosh Hashanah sermon with this word hineni, which is a very big word in the Torah. And Jacob says it, as do many of the other characters. Here I am. I'm ready to respond to what's asked of me. At one time I said this, but now the things I've done I regret, and I'm in this position. Some people want me dead. Some need me. The bridge here, one deed is done, the stealing of his brother's blessing. 2 favorite sons, the source of a lot of this tsurus, the favoritism, and the 400 men that he believes that Esau is still angry and coming to get him. She said, listen to me. This is Rebekah, because when she urges Jacob to steal the blessing, he protests that this isn't going to work, and I shouldn't do this. And she says, listen to me. You got to do it, and I'll be responsible. But then after, when Esau says he's going to kill his brother, she says to him this line, I'm not going to lose you both in one day, which I think is interesting if we think about that, the parenting aspect of parenting siblings, that perhaps this was her fear, that they were going to kill each other. And how painful it is to watch the conflict. And then Isaac says, he said, come here, son. This is when Jacob is trying to steal the blessing, and Isaac is trying to sense whether this is really Esau or not. He says, come here, son, come closer. But we can also take that as perhaps there is a rabbinical tradition, that Isaac really knew what was going on when the blessing was being stolen. And perhaps he's just beckoning his son closer. In spite of all of that. So, let me sing this for you. okay, Graham? There's no one around, but I'm not alone. 85 degrees and I'm shaking. I didn't know then why I did it this way. Set my life ahead to the other side. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. The things I've said, he nay, the things I've done, now I can't see how. Some people want me dead, some need me. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. One deed is done. Two favorite sons. 400 men. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. She said, listen to me. She said, listen. I'm not gonna lose you both in one day. He said, come here, son, come closer. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. One deed is done. Two favorite sons. 400 men. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. There's a fight inside and I can't calm down. There's a fight inside. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for this good discussion. Thank you so much to Melissa. And I need to turn it over to Ellen for some final information and words.
Thank you to Melissa. If you're seeing me, I have no idea where to look. So
Turn that way and look up there.
Hi, Melissa, wherever you are. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, John. Oh, yes. Thank you, microphone. Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. So thank you to everybody I just thanked that nobody heard. What a wonderful presentation tonight, drama and passion and psychology and an original Rabbi Jeff Saxe composition. We had everything. So, and the great news continues to get better every week. Please join us next week as the series continues. Next week, Cantor Leader and Eileen Van Hooser will examine the narratives of Jacob's spiritual encounters to explore the topic of personal transformation. You'll even experience 2 of Jacob's therapy sessions. So we're bringing you everything this summer, and it's wonderful. We thank all of you for being here, either streaming or in person. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you again to everybody who contributed tonight, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.